One, two, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hey everybody, it's me, Sam Jacobs. You're listening to the Sales Hacker Podcast. Thank you for listening, by the way. Today on the show, we've got a great guest. You can just tell sometimes when somebody is just the consummate executive and professional, and somebody that is in a different league sometimes than other operators, and this is why sometimes they get those big jobs. So this is Jason Holmes. He's the president and chief operating officer of Showpad. They're growing very, very quickly. They've got offices both in Europe and in the US. I'm based out of Chicago, and Jason walks through sort of his career journey, beginning all the way back and through, I think, with a company called Hyperion, but also important stints at Oracle, at Omniture, particularly at Marketo, pre-IPO to the take-private transaction, and now at Showpad. So he walks through how he does that, what the lessons are as he tries to grow and develop, how he takes on new functions, which I think is a really important skill set for people. If you're going to be an executive, you're going to inherit things like marketing or customer success, and you're not going to know how to do those things, or at least you're not going to have direct experience. So you need a playbook for how to learn, essentially. And that's what Jason walks us through. So it's a really, really good interview. Showpad's doing some really, really interesting things in sales enablement, and I'm excited to share it with you. Now, before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. We've got two sponsors, as you know. The first, we're so excited to have Lucidchart as a continuing sponsor. Lucidchart Sales Solution is the leading account planning platform for modern sales organizations. With Lucidchart, you can visually map out key contacts and crucial account data to uncover critical insights that will allow you to close bigger deals faster. Go to lucidchart.com/sales for more information. So again, we talk a lot about this, but if you're in enterprise sales, you need some kind of visual tool. It's complicated, and you need some kind of visual tool to map out the organization, to identify the preferences of all of the key decision makers. There are so many decision makers within enterprise organizations at this point. So you need something like Lucidchart. If it's not Lucidchart, it should be something like it to help you visually articulate the organizational structure that you are trying to sell into and the preferences and power of the people that you're trying to sell into. So I think it's something worth checking out. lucidchart.com/sales. Also, our second sponsor is Outreach. That's Outreach, the leading sales engagement platform. Outreach supports sales reps, really all reps, customer success reps, marketing reps, by enabling them to humanize communications at scale. From automating the soul-sucking manual work that eats up selling time to providing action-oriented tips on what communications are working best, Outreach has your back. If you haven't checked out the Sales Engagement book, please do so. Written by Max, Manny, and Mark. It's at Amazon. It's called Sales Engagement, so it should be pretty easy to find. And without further ado, let us listen to Jason Holmes, President and Chief Operating Officer of Showpad. Hey everybody, it's Sam Jacobs. Welcome to the Sales Hacker Podcast. Today, we're incredibly excited to be talking to Jason Holmes. Jason is the president and COO of Showpad, which is a leading global sales enablement provider. He's responsible for marketing, sales, customer success, and partnerships globally. And he's really focused on creating customer value through making salespeople successful every day. Jason was previously COO at Marketo, pre-IPO through the take-private transaction, and has spent time in global executive roles at Adobe, Omniture, and Oracle. He also holds an MBA from Northern Illinois University. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sam. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you. So the way that we typically like to start is, and I just read a little bit about it, but is your baseball card, which is a brief synopsis of your background and career. So we know your name, Jason Holmes. We know your title, which is President and COO, and we know the name of the company, which is Showpad. But tell us a little bit about Showpad. Who are they? What do they do? What do you do? And give us the pitch.
Sure. So Showpad is a company in the sales enablement space or category in the tech industry. Showpad is a company that really focuses on making content findable, making sure that sellers are prepared, making sure that buyers are engaged, modern buyers are engaged with modern sellers, and ultimately providing incredibly in-depth analytics back to marketing organizations and sales organizations on how they can continue to improve. So that's the company and the space in sales enablement. And my role here is much as you said, my job is to help grow this company for sure, but also make sure that we grow this company by making sure that we're acquiring the right customers and making those customers wildly successful in their experience with Showpad and ultimately in their ability to sell in a modern buying world.
Very good. We will dive into that topic, those topics deeply. Just to understand a little bit about sort of the stage of growth that Showpad's in, tell us like the rough ARR revenue range, a little bit about the financing, obviously, how many employees, don't tell us any confidential information, but help us frame the size and the growth stage of the organization.
Showpad today is in excess of 50 million recurring revenue in euros. Actually, we're a European headquartered company in Ghent, Belgium, with a U.S. headquarters here in Chicago, Illinois. We have almost exactly half of our operations and revenue in Europe and the other half in the U.S. So we very much, for a small to medium sized tech scale up, are operating in both locations. We have about 450 people right now. Would expect to end this year somewhere north of 500 people, and continue to just have strong growth and great customer success as we go forward.
Well, congratulations on all of that growth. So beyond the baseball card, we also love to know, there's a lot of folks out there listening that want to one day be Jason Holmes, if not literally, perhaps figuratively. So tell us a little bit about your story. How did you get here? How does one become a president and COO? So what has been your path?
I think there's a number of different routes. So I'll give my path as probably one that's a little bit less common than perhaps others. So my path is essentially, my last real job was probably 20 plus years ago at a company where I acquired software to solve a financial reporting problem. Ultimately decided that working in software would be more interesting, and so entered into the tech industry through a consulting role inside of a technology company at a company called Hyperion. As part of my journey at Hyperion, ramped up over the course of 10 years to be running the consultancy and pre-sales organizations as a VP for the Americas quite a while ago, and managed to then acquire into Oracle, left Oracle, went to a company called Omniture, ran worldwide consulting at Omniture as well, acquired into Adobe, ran global consulting at Adobe. So you'll see this theme of first going from on-premise to SaaS is a big switch that I made. The other is going from consultant and consultancy to include all things post-sale, so owning the customer experience, which as the world has transitioned from on-premise to SaaS, actually matters perhaps a lot more than it did in the on-premise time, because as you know, in the world of subscription software, customers can fire you every single year. And so the need to have strong executive presence in an exec staff and in leadership positions that understand customers and can drive customer value and customer retention is instrumental in growing at some point a highly profitable SaaS recurring revenue business in the industry in which we all work. So my path has been very much from the finance world into the marketing world, from on-premise into recurring revenue, and from professional services through all things post-sale, and then up to and including all things customer related, from marketing, sales, customer success, support, partners and channels, and so forth.
First of all, that's incredibly impressive. And I love the comment that you made that the customer experience imperative has really been underscored by the movement from on-prem to SaaS. Was it your experience that in sort of the world of on-prem, the systems were so hard to rip out that it really wasn't a choice for most organizations to move to different providers?
I think there was first, yes, switching costs were just much steeper. I would think would be certainly the first thing. And I think the second is the leverage. So much of the leverage sat with the vendors, right? The technology providers who they've already got all of your money as opposed to the maintenance stream. So this idea of firing them just didn't really come to the surface very much. And so I think very much the post-sales organizations in the world of on-premise were the no news is good news departments, as opposed to today. I mean, what's happening with the customer experience, retention, gross and net retention, how much you're growing your base. I mean, those are headline items in board meetings, in investor decks, and so forth. And I think are things where you basically have a fairly limited number of people that really understand the intricacies of how to improve them and ultimately what they mean to the business over the long term.
Yeah. When you think, you've mentioned this transition from being sort of a consultant running a services team, global services teams, and then moving into sort of broad general operating functions. What's been, I guess the first question I have is, what do you attribute your success to over the last 20 years when you reflect on the skills, the tools, soft or hard, that enabled your continued growth and development? What do you think those are?
I think first is a never-ending curiosity to learn and to continue to improve and reinvent myself. So I think that's something I take very, very seriously. I try to listen, 2 ears, one mouth, listen a lot, talk a little less, take in a lot of information and adjust. And it's okay to be wrong and not be too strong-headed, strong-minded. So I think there are a few things there in just curiosity and adaptation and reinvention. I think a little bit more practically, leadership and hiring, acquiring, onboarding, training, and making teams work, I think very much transcends all the organizations in the business. So I think a great leader or someone who, appears to be a great leader in the sales organization, if they're a great leader at heart and in their capability, they're actually going to be able to build a great team as you give them more responsibility. In my case, I was able to build great teams in service. And as I get on into these sorts of roles that are broader in scope in terms of different dimensions and functions, job one is acquire, onboard, and create a great team of leaders. And I think that very much transcends the growth. And then last, I would say is, as we would say in my time at Marketo, we live in a world of facts. And so I very much live in a world of facts, of analytics, data, help me understand, show me how we measured that. Like making sure that we have a fact-based operating system as a business is incredibly important. So the business is not run based on the last anecdote, the last conversation, the last person that talked to the CEO, and so forth. And so I think that fact-based approach to the running the business is instrumental. And it doesn't matter if it's one dimension of the business, one department, or all departments of the business. I think it's universal.
And particularly in your role as COO, what's your perspective on kind of single source of truth analytics to the point of a fact-based business, in the sense that sometimes in organizations, there'll be a revenue operations team that sort of reports up through sales. They have numbers. Sometimes the finance team has numbers. And then other organizations have said, even if there are imperfections within XYZ data source, we're only going to use this data source so that everybody's reading. I'm mixing a ton of metaphors here, but reading from the same hymnal. Do you have a perspective on sort of where data needs to sit and whose responsibility is to own it within large organizations?
I definitely do. So I would say first and foremost, I call it the trailer park of operations teams that exist inside of companies. I think create more division than collaboration in teams. And so, for example, here at Showpad, and I firmly believe, I know it's not easy, but I firmly believe having an operations team from a revenue standpoint, so marketing ops, sales ops, customer success ops, services ops, under one leader is essential to driving, first, integrity in the data, and second, making sure that, you don't have all of the politics and evils that live by having different numbers in different departments supporting different agendas. And so I have definitely very much created that as a unified team that reports to me directly in this role. I think so, and I think their job is largely operational reporting of actuals and reporting and roll up of forecasts and budgets. I think then you also have a finance team who see a very close partnership between the revenue operations team and the finance organization. But I rely on finance for all things actuals. And so all things actuals need to come out of finance. They should be reflected exactly the same in the finance reports and in the operational team's reports. And I also rely on finance for all things P&L related and cash flow and balance sheet and so forth related. So I think there is an intersection point in revenue and bookings between these two teams. Actuals come out of finance, everything comes out of the operations team. But I think beneath that, it's a lot of operational reporting and rev ops, and I think it's a lot of P&L, cash flow, and basic financial statement reporting that comes out of finance.
Makes a lot of sense. One more question, and then obviously we'll want to talk about the topic of the day, which is sales enablement and probably revenue enablement, perhaps. But when you are inheriting new functions, to your point, right, that you mentioned that leadership transcends operational departments within an organization. But nevertheless, as you are running a global consulting business or a global services business, and you're given the opportunity to run customer success or to run the post-sale experience for your customers, what's your action plan as you inherit an entirely new function to make sure that you get up to speed, that you're competent on it, that you enable and empower the people below you? And also, an important part of my question, recruit great people, some of whom are going to know more about that function than you are, given that you're sitting on top of it at that point.
So I think the first thing is I'm definitely a style of person that when I inherit new functions, the first thing I do is I listen to the people that have been doing the job for, in all likelihood, far longer than I have at a far more detailed level. And so my job at first is just to learn what I can from them, which generally means creating sort of a safe space of, hey, I know not all things are great and not all things are broken here. So help me understand what's working, what's not working, and what should we do more of, or something along those lines. So I definitely take that approach internally. I also am adamant about engaging and talking with customers directly to understand from their point of view. It can be anecdotal for sure, because you're not going to talk to all 1,000 or 1,500 customers in the case of someone like Showpad. But it is important to get that direct voice of the customer of what's working in enterprise, what's not, what's working in mid-market, what's not. I also then, though, will start to revert to how are we measuring success in this particular group, and making sure that we're clear on the few KPIs or metrics that we want to track. So are we, I inherited a team once upon a time, and it was a consulting team, and they didn't measure utilization. And I said, well, that seems like the silliest thing. And so I waited 30 days and I said, okay, we're only going to track one thing for the next 90 days. I just want to get this one metric in and make sure everyone understands it and starts to orbit around it. So I very much will start to go down a path of how do I measure success, and then ultimately, as I look to hire people, one of the dynamics you'll see that I don't subscribe to is people that move from company to company and they bring like 30 friends with them everywhere, figuring that those friends, I've worked with them in the past, I can move quickly, and that's a great plan. I very much like to understand the business at a granular level, understand the metrics, understand how things are trending from a metric standpoint, understand the personalities that have been running that piece of the business for a period of time, and then make determinations, still the right people or not. If we're going to introduce new people, what is the right type of person that's going to make sense in this situation? And so it's a very careful process versus many people, I think, take the easy route, which is, go find people I know, or go find people that on paper look like the right people, even though they may not be the right people. I think really understanding how those people and new leaders tick and matching them with the problems you're trying to solve at this point in the history of the company is something. It also takes time and it takes a lot of care, but I think it ultimately results in much better outcomes in terms of people that come, they succeed and they stay, and they drive consistency in that customer experience or in that selling experience or marketing experience over the medium to long term.
Makes a lot of sense. When you think about compensation, this is just a topic. I was just at a breakfast actually this morning, and we were talking about how more and more functions within revenue, at least this is the perspective of people at the breakfast, are moving to more traditional. A bigger percentage of their compensation is being put into metrics-driven bonuses. This came from a marketing person. What's your perspective on incentive comp for functions that have traditionally not had a tremendous amount of their compensation in incentives, in commission payments or bonus payments, like customer success, for example, or marketing? Do you align everybody around, highly incentivized commission plans in the same way that salespeople, or do you have a different approach?
I believe that from a comp standpoint, making sure that your comp plan and the expected behavior around a comp plan is aligned with the goals of the business is like fundamental to making sure that the business works well. Like people work well with one another and people strive for the right goals. And that is like the most captain obvious statement. But at the same time, the number of companies and people and leaders that I see that say, well, we want X to happen. We're going to comp a little bit differently than that, but people will do the right thing. It's like all things being equal, why don't you just line up the comp with the exact expected behavior, and it will actually go much better for you. And so I take incredibly great care to make sure that those things are lined up. So, for example, customer success managers, what do I want them to do? I want them to keep and grow the business. And so I comp them on keeping and I comp them on growing. Marketing and sales, like the marketing sales love affair or divide, depending on your company. Sales is comped on revenue. I comp, and I very much believe marketing is comped on revenue. We don't comp marketing on MQLs or SQOs or pipeline contribution. It's on revenue. So if sales is succeeding, marketing succeeds. In the business operations team, they're tied to net bookings. So gross bookings minus churn yields a net. And I generally am a very large fan of having as big a percentage as people will tolerate in variable comp plans. So nearly everyone, for example, in the go-to-market organization at Showpad and prior position at Marketo as well, almost everybody had a variable comp plan, and all of those were very carefully aligned to make sure that they were tied toward unified great outcomes for the company, not necessarily like, well, if you pull together like the Jenga set and like try to figure it all out, like, is this all going to land in the right place, even though it seemed highly contrived and confusing? It's like, no, just like make it simple, make everyone pointed at the same numbers, and ultimately people will collaborate and you'll get the best outcome.
I love it that you said a lot of really important things, I think, in that last little snippet. But one of them is sort of just comping a lot of different functions on the core output, which is revenue. Have you seen a lot? I mean, I guess I'm sort of leading the witness, but would seem like one of the big a potential pitfall is comping marketing organization or even any demand generation function like SDRs on pipeline contribution, when necessarily pipeline is an internal metric that is gameable and doesn't align with revenue. Would that be an example of a mistake potentially?
Yeah, completely. And so, from my standpoint, it's and you can mix them a little, like in the case of BDRs or SDRs. You can and we do things like where you have 75% of it is tied on SQOs or meeting sets, which are obviously, you have an offset of that where sales has to accept that in order for it to count. And that's one you have to keep very close eye on. But a piece of it also needs to be on sales success. Like, did we actually hit numbers in your region or in your segment? And then you share in that success as well. And so like, yes, be highly productive day to day, week to week in doing meeting sets and in doing sales qualified opportunities. But ultimately, you're also not going to get to 100% of your comp if the sales team with which you're working isn't succeeding as well. And so I think you've got to straddle some of them in the cases where you can. And I very much have to live, not just this job, but this job, prior jobs, people that want to come and talk to me about setting comp against something that is not objective. I'm like, step one, you only comp on things that are objective. And so bookings are super objective, and revenue or expense and expense management, very objective. Things that are like so-and-so's opinion or things that are dragged up and down based on survey scores, based on response rates and all that's like, I find them interesting and I find them good in theory, but make sure you can prove to me that it's scientifically objective, and then we'll talk about how we put it into a comp plan. Otherwise, you keep it simple.
Survey scores meaning like customer satisfaction scores, for example.
We track them, we do them, we QBR them, we manage them, tying people's comp to stuff like that. Like when you have a 2% versus a 6% response rate and all of that, providing people upside and accelerated upside on a survey score process and all, it gets very complicated and starts to feel a little bit of fiction land as opposed to facts. And so I very much like to live in the world of facts.
Love it. You have, you're over 20 years. You've been kind of rising up, inheriting new functions. As you mentioned, some of them you didn't have experience in. You went out and listened to customers and you talked to people that were doing the job, et cetera. Meanwhile, there's a different set of conventional wisdom right now in the high growth environment around stage appropriate leadership. And this idea that you kind of need to slot leaders in that have experience with that specific stage. There's a 0 to 10 million stage. There's a 10 to 30, or whatever the stages are. And you kind of need to swap leaders out as you go. I guess the alternative would be to invest in them and invest in their ability to grow and develop. How do you feel about sort of, I don't know if it's opposing views, but there's probably a philosophy that you have around people's upside and their potential to grow as they encounter new and different challenges.
Yes. So I have a very specific point of view on this topic. First, depending on the type of business that you're in, like we're in a high growth business. The business is growing faster than people can grow their leadership and management skill sets and careers. It just is. Like the fact you can't gain 5 years of leadership experience in a year and a half. Though the business is growing fast enough that the size of the team someone might be managing, their complexity of problems they're starting to solve grows exponentially faster than humans can learn. Or most humans can learn. So I think there's three approaches. You have people that you replace. They're just like, they were great from 0 to 10, but now they're just wrong for the business altogether for a variety of reasons. I think that's a pretty small subset, by the way. I think there are people that you top. I think those are the majority of the people. You essentially say, hey, you're a great manager for the CS function, or you're a great sales director. You're not ready to be a VP, but I really want you to stay the sales director for another couple of years while you get more experience. So I'm going to go outside and I'm going to go find a VP to have you report to. And the third is the people that you grow. And those are the people that are the sales VP or the sales director or the CSM who is really ready actually to become a CSM manager, or the BDR who really is ready to go take on a BDR manager type position or something like that. And you grow those people. So I think the people you replace is the smallest bunch. I think the people that you can grow is the next smallest bunch. There's probably 20% of the people in that bucket. And I think the vast majority of people in these high growth businesses are people that you top. And so I think like being able to figure out, especially the grows versus the tops, and not getting yourself too wrapped into, I really like that person, I want them to succeed, and then I'm going to hold on too long to the dream of them making it to a VP, even though they just can't, and they're not going to be able to get there at the speed we need them to, and making sure you're making the right calls at the right times. And I think it's an every year or two process. And for me, it's an annual process to go through and make that determination. And I do it quite physically, and I do it with the board. Did it at Marketo for 5 years. Do the same thing here at Showpad annually. And that way, it just makes you very clear on what work you have to do, hiring that needs to be done, and where you have scale weakness inside of your leadership team.
That makes a lot of sense. When we think about, I'm just digesting those opportunities and thinking about the people that you grow versus the people that you top. How do you manage the folks that, I guess the tension is the judgment that you mentioned, right? Understanding which person falls into which bucket and how to evaluate them. And to the point of your first set of comments, in an objective way, have you created, or is it as objective as possible? Like, does judgment come more into play here, or have you helped create some objective performance management system that has clear boundaries, guidelines, expectations around what a VP is, such that you can tell that senior director or that director, here's what we've previously agreed that this is what a VP does, and here is where you were not able to do that. Is that some part of the system that you've created in your roles at Marketo, Showpad, and elsewhere?
I would say to some extent in a little bit more mature organization like Marketo, the answer is yes. I think in a less mature organization, just in terms of size and systems and what have we written down and what we haven't written down, probably less so in the smaller size businesses. And so I do think it comes with judgment. I also think, frankly, it comes with a couple things. One is being quite open with this philosophy, right? I mean, it's not a secret. Like, people realize that that's how I think and how I operate. And so it's not like a big surprise and people are super disappointed. Don't get me wrong. I know there's some disappointment if, Sally thinks she should be from director to VP and she doesn't get it. But it's not like that's the first time Sally will have ever heard that, as being something that is a probability because of the infrequency of being able to grow people. So I think there's that. I think the other, though, is just you'll interact with people, whether it's at this company or prior roles that I've had, no lack of direct feedback and, making sure that people are fully grounded in where they are and how I view them. And I think, what their growth potential is. And I think if you keep that open dialogue open, and as a manager, you're willing to have like a courageous conversation once a month or once a quarter, or even once every 6 months about, hey, this is kind of how I'm viewing you. And this is kind of what I'm starting to see develop a little bit and what I'm going to have to do about it. I think to the extent you can have that as an active dialogue, so it's not like blindsided 18 months in and like, I totally thought I was, like, it has to be an ongoing dialogue and conversation between you and different leaders and different people in the team. And that way, I think it lands in quite a good place.
Yeah. Let's transition to the topic du jour, which is sales enablement. So, which is the company that you're running right now. The sales enablement space is projected to be worth $2.6 billion by 2024. And so that's a massive amount. I guess my question to you is, first of all, when you say that phrase, sales enablement, you alluded to it in terms of the Showpad technology, but what does it mean? I think a lot of people hear it. I think a lot of people want to put in enablement. I don't know that there's a Wikipedia page that says this is what sales enablement actually clearly means. What does it mean to Showpad?
Sales enablement for Showpad means a few things. One, sales enablement is about preparing sellers. The second thing is about engaging buyers. And third, it's about providing analytics as to what's going on in these B2B buying processes to provide that feedback back into sales organizations and into marketing organizations. So in the world of selling, or in the world of preparing and engaging, I think there's two fundamental, like, what are the two pieces of technology that largely exist in the sales enablement space? I think there's the first big chunk is content, like there's sales content. So PowerPoint presentations, Google Slides, videos, one-pagers, access to data sheets and online collateral and so forth. How do you make sure sellers can find that stuff, share it with customers, and have those customers engage or those buyers engage with that content? So there's a whole content side of the business. The other side of the business is very much about training, onboarding, coaching new sales reps, having them practice their sales pitches, having managers or peers review those sales pitches, and ultimately be able to give feedback and have this continuous improvement. So the thinking goes, if you can have like the best content, if you have the best prepared sellers and you have the best content and the predictable content that they're using and words that they're saying in front of buyers, ultimately you can create a better and more engaging buyer experience and a more capable seller that results in better outcomes in terms of sold deals and size of deals and so forth. And so that's I think those are the nuts and bolts of it. And if you really think about it, and as I think about it, like this problem has not been meaningfully solved in B2B selling right now, right? It is like there are CRM systems that are out there. There are marketing automation solutions that provide tons of leads. There's SharePoint and there are content management systems for dumping a bunch of digital assets into. But like the systems that the sellers log into and use every day to be successful are things like LinkedIn Sales Navigator, Outreach, Showpad. It becomes a pretty short list of things that they care about and things that they log into to help them do their job more effectively. And Showpad very much lives in that world of making those sellers successful.
It seems to me, but correct. I wonder if the word sales as a modifier to enablement would one day become superfluous, because it seems to me that the things that you're describing, which is providing content, information, insights that the organization has generated to the right person at the right time, is not a problem that is specific to sales. It may be that sales needs it more acutely. But that seems to be like a massive opportunity for any company that's delivering answers to questions in real time at the moment that that person in the company needs it.
I totally agree with that. I feel that just in the world of sales, much like Salesforce started with a Salesforce automation solution, and they said, a system of record for service probably would be helpful to bolt on. And then maybe we should get a system of record or something in the lead space with Exact Target and Pardot and so forth. Like there's more to be done from a back office standpoint that you get from someone like Salesforce. I very much view like this is step one is about sales and solving the sales, marketing, customer, buyer divide. But ultimately, and frankly, today, customers absolutely use Showpad and our competitors' products in the customer success organization, in the support organization, in marketing organizations, in some cases internally for internal learning solutions and so forth. So there's tons of opportunity. And I think that's the difference between $1 billion Showpad and a $10 billion Showpad over time, is just growing that audience.
It strikes me that, which is true for so many different companies where they have articulated a software solution to a problem, that you have some pretty deep insights probably into the tangential areas around that problem. So what I mean specifically is, if your solution is delivering assets at the right time, at the right place to the seller or to the buyer, I wonder if you know what assets should be created as a consequence of leveraging them all the time, so that companies that are growing, that want to know what content should we build, how many sales playbooks do we need, what one-pagers should we have. Is that information that maybe your professional services team or somebody at Showpad can help the buyer understand? Because I think a lot of people want to do sales enablement. They're just not quite sure where to start. Like, what is the complete content checklist to make sure that they've got all their bases covered?
So as part of getting going with Showpad, of course, like one of the first things we do is let's do a content audit. Like, what does your world look like today in terms of content? Meaning, what are the different assets that you have available? And just as importantly, in how many places do those assets live inside of the organization? And third, which is usually the unanswerable question, how many of them are actually used by the sales organization or by buyers? And then the clearly unanswerable fourth point, which is, and how are they working? Like, does it resonate with the buyer or doesn't it? And so we definitely lead customers through this process of understanding their content, understanding where it lives, understanding how to start centralizing it. And then really it's this feedback loop of the goal here. I was at a customer meeting yesterday, is how can we create the fewest number of assets that have the highest percentage of utilization that ultimately move the needle and get deals closed or get deals progressed or get deals bigger over the course of time. And if you think in those terms, you constantly need an analytical feedback loop. Consumption, effectiveness, and ultimately it can feed back into, wow, it seems like videos are rocking it. Well, we should probably do a lot more in the video space and a lot less in the PDF space. And so then you start leaning your content development much more in that direction. And so it's that process of first doing a baselining that we will do from a professional services standpoint with our customers, but then teaching them how to constantly engage that feedback to adjust as they go forward in their sales enablement journey.
And you mentioned something, is that true that videos are rocking it? Just because I've been hearing a lot about the growth of video, particularly in sales recently.
I would say categorically, yes. I would also say that we very much market, sell, and implement a horizontal solution. And so, for example, I would say yes. I would say totally yes in the tech vertical, probably not quite as much in like the medical device space and more traditional type industries. So there are hot spots and cold spots on different types of assets and different types of content, but overall, video does seem like something that's doing quite well.
That's exciting, Jason. This has been an incredible conversation. We're sort of coming to the end of our time together. But what we like to do in this section of the conversation is just pay it forward a little bit. You mentioned intellectual curiosity. You mentioned that you're always trying to learn. When you think about either books that have really influenced you, or I don't know, managers, leaders, CEOs, founders, investors, people that have really influenced you, what comes to mind as some of the, things that you think we should be aware of or learn about with the goal of becoming either a better professional, a better salesperson, or maybe even just a better human?
First, I would say the never stop learning. The comments that I see from Bill Gates, for example, who I seldom quote or even think much about, but his comment or his thought around read things that aren't exactly aligned with what your business is, because there are so many things you can learn from totally off base topics and apply them into your day-to-day professional life are actually quite profound. And so I think that, that advice of constantly be learning, but don't get siloed into, I'm going to read a bunch of books about tech companies and how to make tech companies successful. That's actually, you're just going to be, breathing a lot of your own exhaust and rereading things that you probably in many cases know today. I would say other things that I focus on beyond reading is I spend a lot of time listening. I read something recently by Jeff Bezos said, there are people in the world who are pretty smart. People who listen a lot change their mind a lot, and it's because they continue to take in data. I watch people consistently who they form their opinion and then it's like a validation bias or something like that, where they go looking for evidence to support the decision they've already made. I think that's one of the biggest evils you have in executive leadership inside of companies. So I definitely would think in those terms. I think being human, being pleasant to the people around you is incredibly important. I'm convinced, you can have companies that are led by crazy dictators who are intolerable to be around, and they can succeed. I think we've seen that. I actually think you can do it the other way. And so to your comment around being a better human, I definitely view this opportunity to, Showpad is a great example for me right now, which is a place where you can actually be who you are. You can actually drive hard, but you can actually be pleasant and kind and create a great culture while creating a great company at the same time. And so those are a few things that come top of mind for me.
Makes sense. Jason, if people are listening and they want to reach out to you, maybe they want to work for Showpad or they want to become a customer, is that okay if they reach out to you? And if so, do you have a preferred channel, email, LinkedIn, Twitter? How do you prefer to be contacted by strangers, if at all?
Yeah. So, there's www.showpad.com for people that are in the market for sales enablement or think maybe they ought to be now. I'm also happy to have people contact me at my Showpad email, jason.holmes@showpad.com. And LinkedIn is something, like many people, I spend a fair amount of time on. So definitely very accessible there as well.
Wonderful. Jason, thanks so much for being on the show. And we'll talk to you this Friday for Friday Fundamentals.
Thank you, Sam. Appreciate it.
Hey, everybody. It's Sam's Corner. What a great interview with Jason Holmes. He packed a lot into those 38 or so minutes. I want to recap some of it because get out a notepad, maybe. I don't know. Do whatever you want. You don't work for me. You work for yourself. But here's some key things that I think are really important to take away. First of all, I just think that a lot of people are talking about revenue as the key, which sounds obvious, the key metric, the key KPI for revenue organizations. What do I mean by that? Not comping the marketing organization on things like MQLs, leads, pipeline contribution. It may feel like those are objective metrics. We have a lead scoring system in place. It gives this many points every single time. We deliver this many MQLs, but it's not revenue, and it is gameable, and it's controlled oftentimes by the marketing organization itself. More importantly, perhaps even than MQLs or sales qualified opportunities or anything else, is when you're comping the customer success team. And Jason was saying that every revenue team should have a portion of their comp as variable. I think maybe. I don't know if I completely agree, but I think it's an interesting insight. But the point is, don't put accelerators and revenue compensation into non-revenue metrics like customer satisfaction or NPS, a survey that you might run of customers. It's not objective enough, and it's not tied to business outcomes clearly and objectively enough to warrant cash compensation. So just try to align the cash generation of the business with the cash distribution of the business to its employees. That's, I think, pretty important to remember whenever you can. So some organizations take that to an, I don't know if it's an extreme, but they take it somewhere, which is that they refuse to pay salespeople until the money is collected from the customer. I think it's very common. It's particularly common in larger organizations where the check sizes are very, very large. One of the ways you can solve that, instead of having this comp plan that pays people out over a tremendously extended period of time, is simply to demand upfront payment from your customers and then pay people when you collect that cash. I do think that as the business reaches a certain scale, though, the company can subsidize the distance to some extent, provided you have the right policies in place, so that the salespeople aren't shouldering the balance sheet burden of the company. I understand that CFOs want alignment, but salespeople, as individual contributors, don't have equity in the company, or at least the same equity as the CFO or the CEO. CEOs went out and raised a lot of venture capital. You can use that money to subsidize the commission payments of the salespeople, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. If you have a problem with it, I'll tell you how to contact me in a little bit. Also, this idea about stage-appropriate leadership, Jason believes in it. I'm more skeptical, to be completely honest, but he's the president and CEO of Showpad, and I'm not. So maybe listen to him. But he has 3 buckets for evaluating talent as the organization achieves hyperscale. 3 buckets are remove, grow, and top. He says about 20% of the people are grow, about 5% are remove, and so you've got 3/4 of the people that are top, meaning you're going to have people that you bring in over them. If they're the director of sales, you're going to hire VP of sales. If they're a senior director of demand gen, you're going to hire VP marketing. If they're VP marketing, you're going to hire a chief marketing officer. You have to be careful about that. The big thing there is managing expectations appropriately and making it clear that that is your philosophy. And then I think also, again, having objective, clearly defined and articulated guidelines, responsibilities, requirements of the job, so that it's not just, listen, I don't think you're there yet, and then the person says, well, what do I need to do to get there? And you don't have an answer. I think you need to have an answer, in my opinion. Write down what you think the job of a VP or CMO is or should be, how it is different from the current job, and then you can articulate the gaps between this person and what your aspirations are. I really hope, though, that you're not using this framework as a mechanism for unconscious/conscious bias, where because that person is young, or because they are a woman, or because they don't look the part, using the Moneyball framework, that they're not going to get the opportunity to step up. I think that the people that are the most talented in the organization, that are demonstrating capabilities, at least deserve a chance. Once you've articulated those guidelines, give them that chance to succeed. At any rate, I interspersed a little bit of my thoughts with Jason's, but go back and listen to the pod, because I think he really does a tremendous job of articulating the job of a president and COO and providing a framework for how to look at an organization from a strategic perspective. So thought it was a great interview. If you want to reach me, you can. I'm on LinkedIn. It's linkedin.com/in and then /Sam F. Jacobs. If you would be so kind as to rate the show on iTunes, we would really appreciate it. Please give us 5 stars and write something really funny and endearing about me personally. Thank you. And obviously, I'm kidding about that last part. And we want to thank our sponsors, Lucidchart and their sales solution, which is the leading account planning platform for modern sales orgs, and Outreach, the leading sales engagement platform. And I will talk to you next time.